I'm Yonit Levy in Tel Aviv.
And I'm Jonathan Friedland in London.
And Jonathan, you are a columnist for The Guardian.
And you, Yonit, are the anchor of Israel's Channel 12 News.
And we are Unholy from Keshet Podcasts.
Two Jews talking about what's going on in the news. That's what we're doing each week. And I don't know, is it week 758 of lockdown? It's big. I have to say, it's feeling like that here. I don't know about you.
I could report on a bit of lockdown fatigue. Yes, if I see one more episode of Peter Rabbit, let's just say when I look at you, Jonathan, I wonder why you don't have longer ears and fur. I mean, you seem like a very strange rabbit to me. Is all I can say.
I mean, lockdown with young children like you have is a different, kind, and frankly, I think more challenging than lockdown with teenage boys, which is what I'm grappling with here. The clock is the thing, the big casualty. Time is doing bizarre and strange things, so that my 19-year-old thinks nothing of sort of beginning guitar practice. He's learning the guitar at 1:30 a.m. So all the hours are just upside down. You can hear people going in and out of Zoom classes for school, and you check your watch. Is it day? Is it night? The clock is just upside down now.
I keep thinking about, like, in first lockdown, you were like, well, I'll teach you about Neil Armstrong and we'll build spaceships from recycled paper. And like second lockdown, it's, we'll talk about Amelia Earhart and we'll build planes from toilet paper rolls. And third lockdown, it's just like, watch television. Leave me alone.
Be like a normal kid. Watch. Be on PlayStation from morning till night.
Exactly.
Why can't you do that? No, I mean, nocturnal living, that was the thing when there was no homeschooling. Genuinely, I did think that, my younger son was going to become a nocturnal creature and that there would be kind of, nature documentaries made about him. And that changed with the online learning, but not completely. And so, we've now got to that stage where just watching TV together counts as like wholesome family activity. As in the old days, they said we used to make our own entertainment, as if we were setting up our own little chamber quartet of musicians. It now seems noble and wholesome if we just sit, the four of us, crutzing in front of the TV. That counts now as wholesome family time.
I remember I once saw a documentary of Pablo Escobar that cheated while playing with his family Monopoly. He would hide the money under the board. And I could just tell you, after 3 lockdowns, I can really identify with Pablo Escobar on that point, of course,
yeah.
not on other points. So from struggling parents, we want to talk about, we have a lot to talk about this week, but we'll begin by talking about Israeli politics. We are 53 days before the elections, yet another cycle of elections.
Talking of wholesome, noble activity.
Exactly. Or about the world's toughest jobs. And I think being the head of the Labor Party in Israel definitely constitutes as one of them. So this week, Merav Michaeli was elected leader of the Israeli Labor Party, Ha'avodah, as it's called in Hebrew, which kind of begs you to think that you need to give her congratulations and condolences at the same time, right? It's like, great, you won, now hit the light switch and get out because you're the only one left in the room, right? So we kind of have to talk a little bit about the situation of the party that is, of course, an incarnation of the Mapai party, the party that established Israel and ruled it for almost 30 years, and of course of the Avodah in its height, which had 44 seats in the Knesset. So this was a major party in Israel. And now it is dangling somewhere on the electoral threshold. And before we talk about why, I will say a few words about Merav. Merav is a former media personality. By the way, when Bibi says it's me against the media, actually, when you look at it, it's kind of true. I mean, Lapid was on television, Merav Michaeli was on television, Nitzan Horowitz from Meretz was on television, and Gideon Sa'ar, as I told you a week or two ago, was our network's first legal affairs analyst. So yes, it really is Bibi against the media.
By a law of averages, Yoni, you
Don't
will
go
be
there.
leading.
Don't go there.
A political party, 5 years from now, 1 year from now? It's a matter of scientific inevitability.
You're right. I will be leading a political party in Never Neverland.
The Peter Rabbit Party.
Exactly, the Peter Rabbit Party. Me, Lily, and Benjamin. But never mind. got back to Merav Michaeli. She was a media personality. She's an advocate of women's rights. She's a feminist. She's had a very prominent feminist voice in Israeli public arena. When I was preparing these notes for our conversation, I stumbled upon a lecture she gave at a version of TED in Israel, and the headline was "Cancel Marriage."
Marriage, that holy matrimony, that mystical union that brings us together, to heaven to hold, for better, for worse, in sickness and in health, till death do us part. We must cancel marriage. Not only religious marriage, marriage is not an issue of religion, also civil marriage. I want all secular states to totally eliminate all registration and regulation of marriage. I want to cancel the very concept of marriage.
It's an interesting lecture. I actually found myself, listening to her, and she's very compelling, and she knows how to talk. And it's in English, by the way, if you want to listen. And then after hearing it for about 10 minutes, I was like, okay, 1 decade and 1 husband later, it's a bit too late for this. But it's an interesting. She advocates for that as well. So again, what we're trying to ask here is what happens to labor, right? When we look at, there's a very interesting index I always look at, which is the Institute for Israeli Democracy. And it asks Israelis what they would define themselves as being. So in 1995, 35% of Israelis said they are leftists. And 29% said they were from the right, and 28% said they were centrists. Now, fast forward to 2020, 13% of Israelis, a mere 13%, said they would define themselves as leftists, and 56% said they were on the right side of the map. And it kind of begs the question, so what happened? Why in Israel today would someone say that they're leftists, and they'd say it's sotto voce, right? We're from the left, but it will say it very quietly, to the extent that when you look at the first election between Benny Gantz and Benjamin Netanyahu, right, 2019 April, Netanyahu's slogan was Yamin Chazak in Hebrew. That means strong right. Always has to be strong, right? And Benny Gantz's slogan was En Yamin v'Smol Yisrael lifnei hakol. It rhymes, but it also means no left, no right. Israel is the most important thing. So you have one side
no red
saying,
states, no blue states,
exactly,
just the United States.
But what does it mean? It means that there is one side that says, I'm proud of being what I am. I'm proud of being on the right. But the other side is saying, forget left and right. Right? So that means that the other side is ashamed of what they really are. This is where we are in Israel today.
Yeah, I think that has huge resonance outside Israel, actually. I mean, that shift, so that only 13%, and by the way, was that just Jewish Israelis, or was that?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really telling number. There have been, that you can pick up similar shifts elsewhere around the world where, to be identified on the left somehow was to be, at odds with the nationalism sort of project. So you can see that. I think the Labour thing is fascinating for people outside Israel for this reason, which is that in Britain especially, the point of contact for many people in British politics was the Israeli Labour Party. And I'm talking about people in the British Labour Party. They could feel a connection that somehow that was their sister party. And that, just the fact that the clue was in the name, right? There were two parties with the same name. But that was not as superficial as that. It went deeper than that in this way, which is, let's say you were a British or European kind of liberal who, supportive of the idea of Israel and its right to exist, but were worried by the direction Israel had taken in recent years, and let's face it, decades, basically since 1967 and the occupation of the West Bank and Gaza. It was really comfortable if you could say, like that first survey, you said where it was 35% of Israel identify on the left, you could say, we may dislike the current government of Israel, but we identify with this stream in Israeli life, the Israeli Labour Party. Mm-hmm. And so it meant it was very easy. It was a kind of easy sort of dance move you had to make to say, okay, whatever's going on in Israel, but we identify with this tradition, with this stream. And, you could all, so for example, in 1982, when I was, at school, there was controversy about the Sabra and Shatila massacres in Lebanon, obviously committed by Christian phalangist militias, but Israel, the defense minister at the time, Ariel Sharon, held responsible by an Israeli inquiry, etc. 400,000 Israelis went on the streets of Tel Aviv to protest. People outside Israel could say, that's who we identify with. We're not anti-Israel, we identify with them. And Labour was the kind of vessel for that. Mm-hmm. So to read now that the party that Merav Michaeli now leads may not even clear the threshold to get into the next Knesset. And, I know that it may just squeak in. But the fact that's even a question isn't just a big historic shift, the party that founded Israel. It means it's quite difficult for people who want to be pro-Israel without being pro-Israeli government. Who do they root for? Who do they identify with now?
But I don't want to ruin the theory, but I don't think that the idea you built it up so beautifully, but I don't think that the ideas are dead, or that there aren't people who follow it. There's a difference between saying, I don't want to identify as being leftist, but I believe in certain values. Maybe I don't want to call them that way. Maybe I don't vote for Labor. By the way, there are a lot of other, maybe too many parties on that part of the political spectrum in Israel, right? There's Yesh Atid, and there's Khudai, and there's the Labor Party, and Meretz, of course. So I don't think the ideas are dead. I don't think if you're looking to identify with certain ideas, they still exist. And it just means that after you know what happened, if we have to sort of cram 25 years of Israeli history in 2 minutes. But obviously what happened to Israeli society was that 2 attempts to bring peace, right? In 1993, the Oslo Accords, 2000, the Camp David with Ehud Barak and trying to make peace again. And both instances, after Oslo with Rabin and Peres and Barak, both instances led to this literally blowing up in the Israeli public's face, right, with dark years of terror attacks against Israelis. So Israelis felt like, and again, to the extent that I can represent the mainstream opinion, was, wait a minute, if this is what you're trying to sell us, right, if you're trying to sell us peace and what we get is bomb blasts in cafes and buses and in shops, we don't want to buy this anymore. And so the whole idea of the what the left stands for, and you mentioned 1982, it could stand for anti-war and then peace, turned into something that is a harder commodity to sell. It becomes even a harder commodity to sell if Netanyahu suddenly is the person who says, wait a minute, I'm the peacemaker, right? I made the deals with the UAE and with Bahrain and with Sudan and with Morocco. Of course, no blood was shed between Israel and any of those countries. But the point is, and it's more difficult to make peace with the Palestinians and with Jordan and with Egypt, but the point is that he has now taken the main flag that the left was holding and made it his own. So that made it even more difficult for the left. But it is important to remember that there are still a lot of people in this country that hold these that hold the idea of the Palestinian and the Israeli state and the Palestinian state as an idea that they would want to see happen one day. Of course, it isn't on the agenda. I know that must be shocking for people listening from outside Israel. It isn't urgently on the agenda right now in these elections because even Tony Blinken said, this is not something we see in the near future, right?
Yes.
A deal or anything like that.
I think that all makes sense completely. I think the two-state solution as an idea plays a similar role, actually, particularly for liberal Jews outside Israel, which is it's that position which, even if it isn't about to happen, it just in theory holds the place where Jews can say, that's the kind of Israel I want to support. It may not be there now, but that's in principle the position I'm comfortable with. And I suppose what I'm saying is that Labour, when it was a big, bulky opposition party, was that sentiment in institutional form, in concrete form. You could say, yes, to your liberal, non-Israel supporting friend, I too don't like Bibi. I'm for the other guy who's the opposition. The problem with it being so fragmented is there isn't another guy. There's nobody who cuts through. There's no name that's known outside. Back in the 80s or 90s, let's say take the 90s, people knew, people who followed politics knew there was a horse race between Sharon Netanyahu on one side and the Perez Rabin on the other. These were internationally known names. Now, Bibi is the only name that is known outside the country. It is just one person. The fact that he has been there so long, 25 plus years, has an effect in terms of just it's a tool, it's a tree that's so tall that nothing can grow in the shade, in terms of profile outside. So you, of course, and people like you and me, we know the names of Yair Lapid and, Meret. We know our Merets from our Gesher or whatever. But most people don't. They knew before just these two tribes, and they, that had iconic figures, Perez Rabin, versus the other side, Shamir, Sharon, Bibi. And it was very easy then, because you could say as an outsider, I don't dislike the country. I just prefer the blue team to the red team in American terms. Now there is kind of no blue team on the field in terms of how it's seen abroad. And that 13% figure conveys the idea that it's now a fringe. And it's more uncomfortable for Israel people to say, I love Israel. I identify with this little fringe that is so marginal now in Israeli life.
But it's not such a fringe and marginal. I mean, in the beginning of this huge election cycle that is never ending, Benny Gantz, right, who represented the center left, had 35 mandates, right? So it's not a fringe. It just happened to be right now, in this point where we're sitting at, it's shattered. It's completely, it doesn't have, as you say, it doesn't have one leader. I don't think that will change. As I told you a week or two ago, our deadline for that is February 4th. That's next week for the list to coagulate and for it to be clear who's running with who. So I don't think that'll change. But the question...
Well, I was just going to say on that, I mean, so Benny Gantz, as an example, it's harder to identify with that because when annexation was in the air, he was basically for it.
Yeah.
And so that old message which says, one side wants to make peace, land for peace, compromise, territorial compromise. I know why the idea is discredited. You explained it. But it means it's just the old polarity which said one side is, arguing strongly for territorial compromise, the other not. That argument isn't framed that way anymore.
But we should make the point that Benny Gantz, basically what he did and what the Blue and White Party did was go to Washington sort of behind the back of Benjamin Netanyahu and say to Jared Kushner, at the time the president's advisor, don't go for the annexation. Don't do that. I don't think they were for the annexation. They may have not said certain things publicly, and Benny Gantz made it a point not to say the words Palestinian state publicly.
Right.
But he wasn't for annexation.
I thought in his public statements at the time of the government being formed, he signed on for that in principle.
Right.
I know completely behind the scenes working against it, but there wasn't the in principle sort of peacenik objection to that idea. Anyway, but it brings to mind a question I've been wanting to ask you, which is in the absence of that formal sort of bloc that's pushing for what used to explain the sort of peace camp, or define rather the peace camp in Israel, what is the distinction between the parties that are jostling for power now? So I'm watching from afar, it's Bibi and everyone tells me it's going to be him or Gideon Sa'ar, Naftali Bennett. Is that an argument between right and more right rather than an argument between left and right?
50 Shades of Right. Look, I think it's important to answer that question. We need to first look at, we were talking about what's left of the left, right? And what happened to Israeli left. But what happened to the Israeli right? What happened to the Likud that stood for certain values, certain clear values? And today I think it's easier to think of it as what happened to the Republican Party under Trump, right? It became Netanyahu's party, right? And when Netanyahu, who used to talk about the importance of the independence of the legal system and the judiciary, et cetera, right, says basically what happened to me is that I'm being persecuted by the Attorney General and the state's prosecutors and the investigators from the police, and they all colluded to fabricate a case against me, 3 cases actually against me. That has become, this is kind of deep state stuff, right? This has become the main argument of the ruling party in the country. Everyone who follows Netanyahu believes to a certain degree that this is true. And then you have to ask yourself, wait a minute, so what is the difference, right? What does the Likud stand for? And exactly this is where Gideon Saar comes in and says, wait a minute, I'm the real Likud, right? I am the, if you will, the Republican establishment that will take with me the people who still believe in the rights values. Now, when you ask me vis-a-vis the Palestinians, of course, Gideon Saar is more to the right than Netanyahu is. Look at Netanyahu's record. He shelved the annexation. He did speak about Palestinian state. He agreed to the partition plan in the Trump deal. Of course, we know that the Trump deal eventually would not have led to a Palestinian state, but it did have a Palestinian state in the actual accords, right? 70%, not 90 plus, like Ehud or Barak would give them, or Ehud or not, but it did have that. And he doesn't advocate extensive building in the settlements, etc. So Gideon Saar could actually say, wait a minute, I'm more on the right than he is. I voted against this engagement. I'm an annexationist, etc., etc. But the big difference, and this comes to your question, is the rule of law. And Gideon Saar saying, wait a minute, the importance of the judicial system in Israel is something we should talk about, especially if he took Benny Begin with him, right? We will just maybe remind people that Menachem Begin, I think after the Supreme Court decided against his will, said, Yesh Shoftim b'Yerushalayim, there are judges in Jerusalem. The independence of the judicial system was very important for him. So that is one thing that Gideon Saar is standing on. He's saying, I'm not going to let Netanyahu write in a law that will cancel his trial, or try and delay his trial, or try and circumvent the Supreme Court. All of these things we are not part of. So that would be a big difference. It is not vis-a-vis the Palestinian issue, because again, as I say, it is, and I know it might be difficult to hear for people who made this their whole mission in life, but right now it isn't the most urgent thing on the Israeli agenda. It is this question of the rule of law.
Yeah, no, I can. I always one of my favorite lines. That line, the Yesh Shoftim b'Yerushalayim, and it's there are judges in Jerusalem. It goes to a really important difference. I think it may mean people around the world who watch the election, if it happens, and if Bibi were to lose, I could picture them thinking, this is great, it's the end of Netanyahuism, and then being really disappointed when actually what they get is right-wing nationalism minus the sleaze, but otherwise it's the same thing. The election, we're going to keep coming back to it, obviously, week after week, and who knows, month after month, year after year, because it is the perennial of Israeli life. I thought we should talk about coronavirus because a landmark was reached in this country this week, and in a grim landmark, which is 100,000 dead, is the UK death toll. It's headed above that figure already. Within a couple of days, it's now 107,000, 104,000. The figure is very high, and proportionally, it means that the death rate per head, the proportionate death rate, is highest in Britain compared to anywhere else in the world. And, you can imagine the sort of introspection this has prompted. I mean, not really at the political level. Boris Johnson made a statement saying he, takes responsibility for the decisions, and essentially his government did the best it could. And the reply to that obviously is, well, your best isn't good enough. It's an odd situation because it's going hand in hand with these other numbers, which show Britain doing really well in terms of vaccination. And so there is this odd cognitive dissonance, this kind of disconnect, where on one side of your mouth, you want to say, this government have screwed this up terribly. Look at this terrible death toll and this unwanted record as being, the highest proportionate death toll anywhere in the world. And on the other hand, the inoculation rate, very, very rapid, especially in comparison with Britain's European neighbours. And there's this standoff now going on between AstraZeneca, the makers of the so-called Oxford vaccine, who are not giving enough supply to the European Union, and they're angry that they haven't got what they want. It is this sort of disconnect. And the minute I look at that disconnect, I think of Israel, which is the same disconnect, surely, where you've got, on the one hand, amazing number of vaccination numbers, proportionally biggest in the world, but also the infection rate still rising.
Yeah, last week I think we hit the both marks. We were the most vaccinations per capita and the most new cases per capita. There are a few things that are similar between our two countries. I mean, in the way that, first of all, we both have a national health service that I think could be helpful, especially with the vaccination rollout. We both are countries that could close down their borders if need be, and Israel did do that in the very first stages of the coronavirus. I mean, the first case in Israel was found in February 28th. And they closed down the whole country March 12th, right? So that was a very speedy sort of reaction. I think the UK kind of fumbled the ball on that for a while in the beginning. And so I was trying to be British and polite about that. So I said fumbled the ball and not terribly failed. So at the beginning of it was actually a very good beginning. But what happened again as this crisis became a prolonged crisis? We're very good as Israelis coming together at a kind of short 6-day war thing, but not in a very prolonged crisis. And the two things that became sort of our Achilles heel. First of all, and we talked about this last time, the community that sort of did not adhere to restrictions, which was the Haredi community, right? So right now there are 40% of the cases and only 12% of the population. This is what is going on. This is a big, big story in Israel. And the second thing is the fact that Ben Gurion Airport, the only opening of this country, remained open, including in the fall when there were tens of thousands of Israelis going to Dubai and back with absolutely no self-isolation, no restriction or nothing because of our newly found peace with the UAE, and we didn't want to upset them, et cetera, et cetera. So we didn't declare them being a red state and let Israelis basically go and come back. And now we know that many of the variants that they brought with them are part of our problem here now.
It strikes me as a new form of very subtle biological warfare between these two countries, which is to exchange their tourists, saying we're going to send you 10,000 infected travelers, but we've got 5,000 infected holidaymakers, and sending them back and forth. And this is so much more effective than they ever managed to. Any pain they inflicted on each other in the age of war, in peace, you have a whole kind of new threat. I mean, that thing with the borders is a huge issue here and elsewhere, in the United States as well, the sense that they, now it looks crazy. Why on earth did you not just, immediately seal off the borders? In Britain, they're still not fully doing it. Finally, this week they've announced, 30 hotspots. I'm sure Israel will be one of them. But most places, if you're not on that list of hotspots, then you'll be able to still just walk through the front door. And it does seem so daft, to use a Britishism, to be doing that, really crazy. It's very interesting, the point you make about the national system. I interviewed this week Laurie Garrett, who's a Pulitzer Prize-winning writer on science and policy. Mm-hmm. And she made a really interesting point to me, which was that, America was always in a worse position because unusually it began, it's one of the few countries that didn't begin with a top-down national health setup. Yep. Instead, it's a system that's grown up from the sort of bottom up, where it can vary from county to county, let alone state to state. And the result is a patchwork of different rules and how difficult. And, it is quite true that Britain, with its National Health Service since 1948, Israel really from the start having something, not totally dissimilar, it has mean there were some advantages there. I feel as if Britain did fumble the ball. It could have. It's an island, for heaven's sake. It really could have sealed itself off. Israel has that particular advantage, which, as I understand it, really just one main entry point in the form of Ben Gurion. Right. So these two countries had kind of natural advantages. And certainly from the British point of view, I feel it did, it kind of messed them up.
I'm curious about one thing. Every time I kind of listen to what is happening in Britain, and I kind of remember when you talked about that that grim number, the 100,000 deaths. I remember sometime in April, someone said that 20,000 deaths would be a good outcome, and we were shocked by this. But you have passed 20,000 by a mile. It's really shocking. And I think one thing that I always wanted to ask you is what does the opposition do? I mean, does Keir Starmer, head of Labour, does he attack the government? Is it sort of a polite, we're in a war situation, a warlike situation, we're not gonna do anything about it? What is
No,
his tone?
it's raised a really interesting question for opposition politicians. And he decided very early on, remember, he arrived as the new Labour leader in the midst of this pandemic. So in April, he had to give his victory speech just via Zoom. You know, he's not been able to be a kind of regular, normal leader. No, he decided the strategy would be constructive opposition. We're not going to do opposition for opposition's sake. And so very often when the government announced new rules on lockdown or mask wearing, straight away he's up to say, yes, I agree, I support the government. The difference is that this is going to be helpful for him long term, is at several key moments he suggested a different path. For example, in September, he said, we've got to go for a circuit breaking, not a second lockdown. And Boris Johnson dismissed him and said that was ridiculous. And a few weeks later, he ended up doing it. And so at each stage, actually, Keir Starmer can say, I've been supporting the government, but I have been in the right place 3 or 4 weeks before they were. So that's useful. But you get me on something interesting, which is the politics. And I think there's a fascinating question or a parallel here between the situation for Netanyahu and the situation for Boris Johnson, which is a question a commentator here wrote this week is, what do voters remember? Do they only remember the end of the story? Or this was a piece by Tom McTague in The Atlantic. Do they only remember the end of the story or the whole story throughout? Now, if the story ends in both places, Israel and here, with a successful mass vaccination that was faster than any of their neighbors, maybe fastest in the world, maybe that's the end of the movie and everyone stands up and cheers. Or do they remember all the pain and agony that got you there and all the terrible mistakes? And for Boris Johnson, his whole, political future may hinge on that, but, big deeper than that, in a way, how Britain thinks about this experience. Is it a 5-year war that we won, or is it a 5-year war of pain and grief and mourning? And I know you and I both are big fans of Aaron Sorkin. Mm-hmm. And, Aaron Sorkin apparently holds the view that the last 15 minutes of any movie is the crucial 15 minutes, because that determines whether people, how they feel about the movie. Did they like it or not? And I don't know whether we're in the last 15 minutes, but vaccination is a big part of that.
I really hope we are.
Me too.
I really hope we are. That reminded me that when he brought Rob Reiner, the American president, it was a 450-page script. And Rob Reiner said, take out all the politics, just leave me the romance. And he took out all the politics, and that was West Wing. The American President is not a bad film, by the way.
I like that film.
Yeah, not bad. I know. You're a bit of a sap. I would know you.
Yeah, no, I love. Well,
it's a good movie. It's a good.
One of my favorite things is presidents on screen, and because it's a sort of genre I love. But the American President is a bit sappy. But you're absolutely, that's right. It prompted the West Wing.
So, what is your best president on screen?
No, when I say president on screen, I mean sort of presidential stories on screen. And so it was on here on TV the other day. I will watch all the President's Men anytime. If I just land in that, it's 3/4 of the way through, I will watch it to the end. That's a particular category of movies. I think we have to nominate, do we not, our Chutzpah and Mensch Award winners this week, because it is the act of generosity that we perform.
So you do the Mensch.
Okay, so Mensch of the week. I think I'm going to go with the one that is slightly serious, but I think he deserves it, and that is, and maybe we'll do this every other week. Who knows? But President Joe Biden did something important this week. It was on January the 27th, Holocaust Memorial Day, the anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz. And it falls to politicians all over the world to mark that moment. And, Joe Biden issued a statement this week that in a way, in any normal circumstances, would have been just boilerplate and normal, unremarkable. And the key thing in it was that this statement mentioned in the first sentence Jews and anti-Semitism as a central part of the Holocaust. And as I say, you wouldn't think that is news, except this time 4 years ago, Holocaust Memorial Day, when there was a new President, Donald Trump, he managed to issue a statement that didn't mention either Jews or anti-Semitism, and that somehow blended in the Holocaust as if it was just we regret all the losses of the Second World War or something. That was the language. And so Joe Biden, just for getting that right and reminding us of the importance of the day, but also how an American president should behave, and speaking with some kind of gravity about that event. I thought he would be a deserving winner as our nominated mensch for this week.
And the chutzpah award of the week, would you want to nominate someone?
Well, you touched on it a tiny bit when you mentioned the Haredim, the ultra-Orthodox in Israel, actually in lots of places, and you mentioned that in Israel the infection rate among ultra-Orthodox Jews is 40%, or they account for 40% rather of the infections and only 12% of the population. This is, as I say, a phenomenon in Jewish communities around the world, in New York and even here in London. There was controversy this week in London where it emerged that a indoor wedding celebration had happened in an ultra-Orthodox school. It's said to be 400 guests. I mean, this is at a time when people are not even going to see their own elderly parents indoors. Nobody is seeing anybody. And so the 400 gathering, distressed people a lot. It's led to these sort of standoff scenes with the police in Israel trying to enforce the rules, and these standoffs, and people I hear have been very shocked by these images of burnt out buses and Israeli police firing in the air, etc. And I saw that one Haredi activist tweeted that these scenes of rioting, etc., were proof that the ultra-Orthodox schools have to keep on staying open, even though every other school is closed, because if they don't, and their young people don't have a place to go, then of course they're going to go out onto the streets and there'll be trouble. So all this trouble that we're causing is an argument for why you have to let us carry on causing more trouble, so that we won't cause more trouble. I mean, it is just so circular. The logic, keep our schools open so that we can get our kids off the streets, otherwise they'll riot. I think that kind of logic is chutzpah almost in the purest sense, and so the Haredi spokesman who came up with that, I think, could get a chutzpah award, perhaps along with the organisers of that huge Hasidic wedding in Netanya, where I've also seen pictures of, again, hundreds of people indoors. I mean, it is a big problem.
It is. I'm going to add, because we did mensch chutzpah, and now we're just going to, a little bit of the mensch, just a little bit, because I did speak, do you know Yuda Meshi Zahav? I did speak to him this week. He's a Haredi who heads the emergency response organization in Israel. He's very well known in this country. He lost his mother and brother in the same month to coronavirus, and while he was sitting Shiva on his mother, he lost his father as well. This is really like the story of Job. And he was on television. I spoke to him. He's begging the Haredi community, please wake up. This is something that you must realize, that we have to wake up, and we have to, as a community, be more responsible.
That's a deserving mensch. I'm with you on that. I second that mensch nomination.
I think so too. We really kudos to us for ending on fluffy topics, fun and fluffy topics.
Very good. No, we will forward those to the Mensch and Chutzpah committee who meet in Stockholm, I think, and we will send them with all our signatures and seals formally ratified, and we'll await their decision. It's
an honor just to be nominated, or dishonor, just to be nominated. It depends on your vantage points. Jonathan, thank you. It was always a pleasure talking to you. We want to thank Rom Atzik at our podcast division, and Yair Bashan and Irad Eshel for original music, and Lior Friedman, our wonderful editor.
Yeah, so if you are listening to this and you've enjoyed it, then please do make sure you review the episode and perhaps give us even a 5-star rating. We love that, because that really helps get this podcast in front of more people. And crucially, you've got to hit the button that says subscribe, because if you do that, then Unholy will land in your podcast feed automatically without even the need for human or even divine intervention. Your need.
Jonathan, we'll meet next week.
Till then, bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Shalom.